Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Englogic, the podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam. I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language and a language learner myself. And I'm the creator of the YouTube channel Englogic, where I teach advanced English and the language learning process through the analysis of its logical and mathematical patterns. Not just to students, this channel is also aimed at teachers who may want to explore a different approach to teaching English. And it turns out that native English speakers also find it interesting because they like to know what happens in their brains and minds when they speak. Just so we all know what's going on, I'm shooting this as a video podcast for YouTube. So if you are watching this episode on YouTube, you can find the link to my channel and you're ready to go. If, however, you're listening to it on a podcast platform, don't worry about the fact that you can't see me. First of all, I will try to find a way to link my YouTube channel to this platform so you can have a look at it if you want to. And since I'll mainly be discussing things rather than actively teaching, the video and visual element is not crucial. But if I do need to mention something visual, I will try to make it as clear as possible with my voice so everyone can understand what's happening. I might actually decide to upload some of my more teachery videos as podcasts as well, but again, if I do, don't worry, I'll guide you through them with my voice. And this brings me to the purpose of this podcast. On my YouTube channel, I post teaching videos every Tuesday where I cover advanced grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. And since I am in teaching mode and I want to fill my vocabulary videos with fancy and sophisticated words, that is all I do. I just teach. But this format does not really allow me to express my opinions and discuss what goes into learning and teaching a language, the thought processes and the philosophy behind it, and what I believe to be the most correct and effective approach towards learning languages. So this podcast is exactly about that. I'm not starting this new adventure with the idea of teaching anything per se, so you won't learn anything that you can use in English exams, for example, but I just want to share my experience and views on everything related to languages, but not just that. Obviously, English and languages will be the primary focus of this podcast. Today, for example, we're going to talk about how to become and choose an English teacher. In the future, we'll talk about how I study languages, why I will never learn a new language, why I stopped teaching students and now I only do it on YouTube. We'll talk about how integration works. We'll compare English to the other languages that I know, which are Italian, German, Spanish, and a little bit of French. But I do not want to restrict myself to just that. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I wear many hats and I want to tell you all about it because I don't just teach, but I trained in screen acting. I'm not an actor anymore, but I still perform and I am a very peculiar kind of performer because I'm a singing drag queen and I definitely want to tell you all about that. Before becoming a performer, I got into maths university. I'm also a YouTuber and I would like to show you how YouTube works from the point of view of a creator. Also, I'd like to show you how the world of acting works from a technical perspective. I know exactly what you're thinking. What does any of this have to do with English as a foreign language? I strongly believe that learning a new language is not all about assimilating new information all the time. If you watch my videos, for example, I release the teaching ones every Tuesday and I talk about grammar, pronunciation and vocabulary. That means that every week your brain gets bombarded with new information and that's very demanding for you because not only do you need to understand what I'm saying, but your brain needs to assimilate it, learn it and remember it. And I think there comes a point where your brain is oversaturated with too much new information that of course it understands, but it can't assimilate it to the point where it can actually actively use it. So it's basically pointless to learn too much too quickly. I firmly believe that your brain needs to rest. So by watching or listening to me, I want you and your brain to sit back and let me do the hard work. Let me use all these strange conditionals that we talk about in my videos, all the pronunciation tricks that I teach you. When I watch a film in German, I don't go into it actively wanting to learn anything. I go into it wanting to understand what's happening and what people are saying. And I love seeing that people use the structures that I learn. So I love seeing that they use conditionals exactly the same way that I've learned them. So that tells me that I've learned them the correct way, first of all, and also it tells me that I've assimilated them well enough for me to spot them and then use them in real life. I want to make sure that I understand real life pronunciation, which is completely different from the standard and pure pronunciation that we learn when we learn a foreign language. And what this means is that I'm practicing passive learning. Of course, my brain is not 100% at rest because I'm still dealing with a foreign language that I need to work hard to understand, but it's the closest to full rest mode that I can get to. And of course, especially in terms of vocabulary, if the film uses one word over and over again that I don't understand, I might just look it up there and then because I do want to understand what's happening. Or if the film uses a word that I don't know but whose meaning I can infer through watching the film, of course I will make a note of it, but just because I'm a language geek. But actively learning is not the intention that I go into watching the film with. Another reason why I do not want to talk about English all the time is that it's boring for me and for you. And more importantly, it is not representative of reality. We never talk about these things in real life, and it can become very self-indulgent. My goal when I learn a new language is to be able to use it to talk about every single thing that I talk about in my native language. My friends and I never discuss the subjunctive or the difference between British and American. We never talk about conditionals. We just use grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation of English to talk about all the things that we want to discuss. And that's why in some of my vocabulary videos, I talk about some of my life experiences. For example, my recent cruise or Christmas and how much I love Christmas, because that's what we use English for. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that students face. They learn English on English books, obviously, and they just think and assume that we talk about only the topics that the books present to them, but that is not true. We talk about work, we talk about our house, we talk about love, we talk about gossip. We gossip just like everyone else in the world. We talk about holidays, we talk about video games, films, we talk about Pokemon. Every single thing that people all around the world talk about in their native language, we do the same here in England. All of that being said, today we are going to talk about languages, more specifically about becoming and choosing an English teacher. I have always wanted to talk about this topic, but I could never quite find a teachery format for a teaching video, and that's where this podcast format comes in. Also, another thing that spurred me to make this video is a couple of very nice comments that I've received on my channel from English teachers who told me that they wished they'd seen my videos while they were training because they found them very useful. And first of all, thank you very much for saying that. And as a language student, I think it's very important for you to understand and know what goes on behind closed doors and what happens to a teacher, how we become teachers and how we prepare for lessons, and what kind of preparation and education we receive from schools. Just to be clear, I will be making negative comments on teachers, but this is not a way for me to draw you to me as students because, as I said earlier, I do not teach students anymore. So this is not a way for me to promote or plug my own business. I have nothing to gain from sharing my opinions other than potentially hatred from other teachers. Also, earlier I told you I'm a singing drag queen, and I'm planning to make a video in full drag where I tell you all about it. And all my friends keep telling me that I should make more teaching videos in drag as well. Now, that is something that I've always thought about, but I'm not sure it would suit the advanced level of what I teach. So let me know in the comments what you think about it and whether you would like to see me doing some teaching videos in drag as well. The first step in this episode is to tell you how I came to be an English teacher, and in order to do that, I think I should share a little bit of my background with you. And mine is definitely a prime example of how dreams and careers can change and how life can take you in all sorts of very unexpected directions. I grew up in the north of Italy, and I was very good at languages, and I always liked performing, specifically dancing. So very early on, I decided that I wanted to be either an English teacher or a dancer. Then I realised that dancing was a great passion of mine. I was only an amateur dancer though, but I understood that it was not a career path for me. I don't think I was very good, and anyway, I didn't want to go down that path. Now, I have always been a teacher at heart. I used to teach my classmates, I used to teach my brother, I have a younger brother, and all his classmates. So I've always loved teaching, and I love the idea of making people independent through the knowledge that I have. And what happens in Italy for secondary school is that you need to decide what sort of areas you want to specialise in. And I picked languages. I studied Latin, English, German, Spanish. I also did French in middle school, but I can't claim to know it well enough to even attempt a basic conversation. But I do know a few fun facts, a few grammatical elements about it for sure. There isn't any kind of romance or magic about this, but one day when I was 14, I just woke up with an uncontrollable urge and desire to become an actor. I don't know what inspired me, but I really wanted to become an actor. I grew up with Harry Potter, and at the time I used to look a lot like Harry Potter, like Daniel Radcliffe, and I love magic. So I really just wanted to be Harry Potter, and I think that played a great role in me wanting to become an actor. But again, to this day, I don't really know what came over me. And I knew that I wanted to speak English as an actor, so I spent all of my secondary school years longing to come to England, specifically to London, where I could speak English and study acting in English. But while I was specialising in languages in secondary school, I also fell in love with mathematics, thanks to the teacher that I had in my final years, who showed me what maths is really about. It's not about learning formulas by heart, but it's about how far the brain can stretch and what it can conquer through sheer intelligence. I will make a podcast episode on that, and I will also make a podcast episode on why I went off learning languages in Italy. But when I graduated, I had a big decision to make because I loved maths so much that I took an entry test into Maths University, where I lived in Bologna in the north of Italy, and I got in. But my other option was also to come to London and study acting. Now, as much as I loved the idea of speaking and breathing English every single day and the idea of acting, I am, and what was and still am, very close to my family. So in the end, I would have actually gone for Maths University because I would have basically still lived with my family. And it's only thanks to my mum that I'm here, because she knew that deep down I really wanted to be a performer. So she pushed me to come here. She bought me a one-way ticket to London, and I was not allowed to come back. I was not allowed to buy a return ticket just yet. And yes, thanks to her, here I am. As much as I miss mathematics, I am eternally grateful to my mum, because performing is my primary passion, and it's not just a passion, it's something that I need in order to be happy. So I'm very glad that I had her support to come here. Now, I did my acting training, and we'll talk about that in another video, and like every performer, I had to start working in hospitality and to become a waiter, because obviously I had bills to pay. And over the years, I'd still kept teaching people like randomly and privately on a very random basis, so nothing permanent, nothing that could sustain me financially. But after a long time working as a waiter, which I absolutely hated, I decided to turn this teaching into a potential career. So while I was waiting for my acting career to take off, I could do something that I actively loved, which is teaching. So that's when I decided to become a qualified teacher of English as a foreign language. Quickly off topic, I did become a teacher, and since my acting career wasn't going anywhere, I had to reinvent myself, and that's how I came to be a singing drag queen, which I'm very happy about, and it's now my primary full-time job on top of YouTube. But again, we'll have to come back to that another time. There are several qualifications that you can obtain as a teacher of English as a foreign language. I picked CELTA because, as far as I could and can tell, it's the most widely recognized and the one that can open the most doors worldwide. It's basically the most ironclad qualification that you can get. And the training that I'm going to talk about is the training that I had here in London 10 years ago, because that's when I got my qualification. I don't know if things have changed, but obviously this is my experience about what happened when I was there. Both native and non-native speakers of English can become qualified teachers, and in order to start the process, you need to take an online test first. Then you have another test in person, which is part of an interview that you will have with the teachers there to decide whether you qualify, whether your English is good enough to become a teacher, but not just good enough, because if you're a native speaker, obviously it will be good enough for you to enter, but it's also about whether you know the grammar and pronunciation and vocabulary of English well enough to be able to teach it. Then if you do get in, the whole course starts. You can choose between two options. There are full-time courses which last a full month, or you can do a part-time course which I think is spread over the course of 3 months. I did the full-time course, which only lasted 1 month, but let me tell you, it was extremely intense because it was basically 9 to 5 in school, and then we had a lot of homework to do. Before the course starts, they also send you a list of suggested books and material that you can study in order to prepare for the idea of becoming a teacher. It's not compulsory, but I obviously studied one of those books because I'm a geek, and although I absolutely loved it, I have to be honest, it was completely pointless and irrelevant because it had no impact on my preparation before the course or even during the course. But again, I did it and I'm happy I did it, but I would not do it again if I knew that it really did not give me any kind of edge or advantage during the course. As I said earlier, I did the full-time course, 4 weeks, Monday to Friday, and thank God it did not last one day longer, because as much as I loved it, it absolutely killed me. It was such a soul-draining experience because we were busy all the time. We had to be in school from 9 to 5. In the morning, we were taught things and we had lessons to learn things. And in the afternoon, we had teaching practice. So we had to teach students. And in the evening, we had a lot of homework every single evening and weekends. We had essays to write over the weekend that we were assessed on. And the homework was terrible, not only because we had to study and learn what we'd learned in the morning, but also we had to prepare a lesson plan for our lessons. Now, the lesson plan was very well structured, but the problem wasn't so much coming up with ideas as to what to do in the lessons, but it was all about the writing. We had to write every single word down in a very detailed way, and that was extremely time consuming. Obviously, I understand that that was the only way for our tutors to see whether we'd learned correctly, what we were doing, what we were trying to put into practice, and what we were trying to achieve. But from my point of view as a student and as someone who'd already taught before, it was completely pointless to squander so much time on writing down things that I already had in my head. but that was part of the course. There was nothing that we could do about it. I did say, and I will say again, that I absolutely loved the course, but that's only because I really and genuinely love teaching and languages. But the course itself was very underwhelming, and I think it's full of flaws, and it failed to deliver on a lot of levels. The primary problem of this course, in my opinion, was that the goal was to teach us aspiring teachers how to teach English, but they never taught us what to teach. So basically, they taught us all the techniques to involve students and to pass information to students and to impart knowledge in an effective way, which is great. The problem is that they never cared to even think about whether we actually had any knowledge to impart. So what that meant was that during the course, we were never really taught any kind of English grammar or English pronunciation or English vocabulary, or how foreign minds work when they learn English. Don't get me wrong, we did have a couple of lessons on, for example, the difference between the present perfect and the simple past, or a couple of tips on pronunciation and how to read pronunciation symbols. But the problem was that we had no strong foundation in our individual knowledge that we could then share with our students. In my class of teachers, a third of us were non-native speakers of English and the rest were native speakers, and the divide and difference was astounding. What we need to understand and know is that in England, English people do not learn English grammar in school. I mean, they do to the extent that an adjective is a describing word, a noun is a name, and a verb is a doing word, but that's where it ends. Whereas abroad, for example, in Italy, where I grew up, although we spoke Italian as our first language, we learned a lot of Italian grammar in a very deep and sometimes unnecessary way, may I add. And that's what makes a huge difference in the way native speakers of English and non-native speakers of English learn foreign languages. Native speakers of English do not really have any solid and strong foundations to rely on when it comes to grammar, whereas foreigners tend to have that because they learn the grammar of their own language first, and they can apply those thought processes to other languages. The structure of the course was that in the morning we learned techniques as to how to teach, and then we were given topics that we had to prepare for our teaching practice. Now, the problem was that the school expected us to learn and research all the theory behind these topics on our own, or to just simply know it already. And I will never forget one of my native colleagues. She had to teach relative clauses. Now, the problem was that she had never heard the term relative clauses. She didn't really know what a relative pronoun was, and not because she hadn't studied well enough in England, it's just that she had never been taught by the school what a relative pronoun or a relative clause was. And she did do all her research, she did put in the effort, but she was struggling, and I will never forget how inadequate she felt, because she knew that she didn't have enough knowledge to be able to deliver a solid lesson where she felt comfortable enough to teach something to their students, and where she felt comfortable enough to potentially answer questions that the students may have. And this is what has always petrified me as a teacher, which is the idea of not being knowledgeable enough to be able to improvise and answer a potential question that I haven't prepared for. Now, luckily, when it comes to English, since I studied it so much and so deeply, I am very lucky that it's very unusual that I would find myself in that position. And I'm not saying this to brag, it's just that I've put a lot of work and effort into learning the grammar and pronunciation just because I love it, and I am lucky that I can rely on that work to then help me out when my students ask me things. But I understand that not everyone has that wealth of knowledge simply because they've never had the chance, or they've never even thought about the fact that they might need it. So I do believe that courses like this should dedicate a much bigger portion of their curriculum to teaching us, future teachers, a much more solid and comprehensive technical foundation of the language. But this is where I have to criticize teachers as well. As much as I enjoyed this experience, I found it extremely saddening and worrying. The most disheartening thing that I discovered was that out of the 10 of us in the course, only 2 of us were actually there because really and genuinely liked teaching and were passionate about it. Everyone else, mainly the native speakers, were only there because they wanted to use their qualification to be able to travel abroad. It's very common for English teachers from England to use their qualification as a very easy way to live and travel abroad. And I did not like that at all when I was learning to become a teacher, because I realized that these people had no clue about what teaching was, never mind English, but just the whole idea of being a teacher. They underestimated what being a teacher meant and what kind of impact a teacher can have on their students. And they just thought it was a very easy gig because they already spoke English as their first language, so they could simply just, come up with a couple of lessons to then teach their students, who will then simply learn everything they're taught without questioning it. And I did not like that in the slightest. And not only do they not particularly care about teaching at all, but most native English teachers do not speak a foreign language themselves, meaning that they don't actually know how a foreign mind works when it's trying to learn a different language. Now, I am not saying that every English teacher should be able to speak another language, because that doesn't mean that they can't teach it necessarily, but it's obviously a good plus to have. I know that I can teach language as well because I know how people think when they learn English in my case. There are some amazing native English teachers who do not speak a foreign language, but they make up for their lack of understanding of how a foreign mind works with their passion for teaching. So you can find them. But I have to say that the general feeling that I came away with after the course was great sadness, because I could see that most teachers don't particularly care and they're not even passionate about it at all. When I was still teaching students, I never taught in an actual school. I only ever taught adults in person and then online. But I did have the chance to teach in a summer school one year. It was a fantastic experience, but it did confirm my previous points about teachers not particularly caring. There were quite a few of us teachers there, and obviously it's a summer school. It's not as serious as a real school should be. But part of this experience was to have English lessons either in the morning or the afternoon, and then to have a special activity when you were not learning English. And I was really, really put off and saddened by the fact that most of these teachers really did not care at all. Obviously, we were dealing with teenagers, and these teachers just assumed that all they wanted to do was play a couple of silly language games. But I have to say that that was not the case. Of course, the lazy students were really happy, but well, in my classes, nobody ever played any games. We studied very hardcore English in a very fun way, but still we did learn a lot of content. And I have to say that I was originally worried that the students may not like me because I was teaching them too much. But actually, they really appreciated it. And I had a lot of these students that thanked me for actually teaching them something rather than just, singing songs in English and playing a couple of games. Now, although I personally do not particularly believe in language games, I do understand that some of them may work, and it's always very good and positive to be a bit more lighthearted about learning a language, which I do as well as a teacher, don't get me wrong. But it's one thing when it's a competent and passionate teacher deciding that it's time for a light-hearted approach. It's a completely different thing when it's a teacher that doesn't particularly care about the language learning process and that doesn't know any better, so they just resort to games because they have nothing else to offer. And this brings me to another baffling element of this whole teaching process. Now, I said that I've never taught in a school, which is true because I've never wanted to teach in a school, because although I love teaching, it's always been my second passion. My first passion is performing. So I did not want a full-time job in an institution such as a real school. Now, the problem is that even if I'd ever wanted to work as a full-time teacher of English as a foreign language, I could never have done that because I do not have a degree. After secondary school, I decided to study acting, which was a full-time course for 2 years, but it didn't fall into the category of a university degree, which is exactly what I wanted. I did not want to go to university. So technically, I do not have a degree. I have my CELTA qualification, but that does not count as a degree. If you want to apply for any kind of teaching job as a teacher of English as a foreign language, you must have a degree and your CELTA qualification. What I don't like about this is that this degree can be in any subject you could think of. One of my classmates who wanted to become a teacher himself had a degree in history. Now, I'm not saying that history is irrelevant for the world, but it is absolutely and fully irrelevant for an English teacher, because what it was going to do with that qualification as an English teacher was just to teach English, not history in English. All you need is a degree in physics, which I absolutely love, but it has nothing to do with English. Now, of course, I agree that there must be some kind of vetting system for teachers. You can't just hire the first person off the street. And of course, they must have their CELTA qualification or a similar one. But I think there should be a bit of wiggle room and lenience towards other situations where, for example, I could get a job as an English teacher because, yes, I do have my qualification, and also I've been teaching my whole life and I can do it very well. So the fact that somebody has a degree in history or physics means that they are very knowledgeable about those subjects, but that does not make them any better as English teachers. I understand that having a degree means that you have been involved in the academic world, which I haven't. So maybe you are expected and thought of as being able to write properly, or address and discuss a topic in a very formal and sophisticated way, and I completely agree with that. But again, I don't think that only wanting to see any kind of degree and your CELTA qualification is a good enough criterion to hire potential teachers. So if you're a passionate, aspiring teacher out there, I highly recommend you have a thorough and deep look at English grammar and pronunciation. You will learn a little bit more about the process of learning and teaching vocabulary in the course. Having that preparation beforehand will help you a lot and will save you a lot of time, because it was very time consuming for me and I already had that knowledge. So luckily I did not have to look up what relative clauses were or how to teach them, because I already knew that. But even then, that course was amazing, but it was hell. It drained me completely. So you do want to have that edge when you first start, also to make you feel more comfortable as a teacher. But if you're a student, how do you pick the right teacher? Now, that is a very hard question, and it's very difficult to answer. First of all, we need to understand that not all teachers specialize in the same levels or in all levels. Personally, I do not like teaching beginners. I only like teaching advanced levels and taking them to a more advanced level, if not to perfection, ideally. That is what I like, and that is what I know I'm best at. That's where I know I can shine and I can give you as a student the best that I have. When I used to teach students, I never really took on beginners because I knew that I wouldn't like it, and also I knew that my method would be too extreme, because if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that my method is very mathematical and logical and scientific. When I first started teaching online, I was so desperate to leave hospitality that I was willing to do anything. And I started by teaching Chinese students, again online, from the age of 3 to 13. So they could barely speak Chinese, most of them. And I was there trying to drill these words into their brains, words like colors and numbers, obviously, very simple things. And oh my God, I absolutely hated it. It was excruciating because I don't like children to begin with, and I do not like beginners. So for me, that was horrendous. I lasted a month, and then luckily, thanks to other clients that I had, they told me about other online companies that specialize in adults. So I started teaching with them. So yes, I know that I am not good with beginners. I do not enjoy it, but there are teachers that only specialize in beginners, and that's great. So maybe you can start with them if you are a beginner, and then you can move on to a more advanced teacher later on. It also depends on what you as a student like in a teacher and what you want to get out of learning a language. The last online company that I worked for hired me as a freelancer to teach its clients. And it also provided us teachers with all the material that we needed to create lessons. So we basically just had to follow the material and interact with the students. Now, that is not my method. That's not how I teach. I'm not saying that the material was bad quality or not accurate enough. I'm just saying that I do not like to stick to a script. And funnily enough, the students from this company, and it was up to them to then choose the teacher that they wanted to study with. Most of them, when they came to me, complained about the fact that their previous teacher only followed the script religiously. So what they did in the lesson was not about interaction, it was not about chatting, which is what most people want to do. But these teachers only stuck to the script and just went from point one to point two. Again, for some students, it can work and it will work, and that's exactly what some students want because that's how they like to learn. I'm just saying that there are other students out there, like me, for example. When I learn a language, I do not want to follow a script. I want to have a different approach, which is the approach that I like to give to my students. My method is very scientific. I want my students to understand and then learn the logical and mathematical patterns behind a language, in this case, English. I strongly believe that languages are pure mathematics, and you can analyze them just like an equation, and you can find the patterns that rule this equation, and by understanding them, then you can manipulate them however you want within the realm of what is allowed by the language itself. Using a very basic example, I don't particularly care that you remember that the conjugation of to go is I go, you go, he goes, with an S there, simply because I've told you and you have good memory and you can simply memorize that. But what happens if you just memorize the structure? If I ask you to conjugate the verb to speak, then you will say I speak, you speak, he speak, without the S, because you haven't understood and learned the logic behind it, which is very basic. It's simply that the third person singular requires an S. But if you don't know that rule, and if I don't show it to you as a teacher, and if you don't understand it, you will never be able to apply it to other verbs that you will see in the future. And that's what I want. I want you to be able to use the rules that I teach you and that I show you in the future on your own, so you can apply them to whatever situation, whatever verb, whatever word, whatever grammatical structure you encounter and you need. We'll talk about this in more detail in the future, but if I show you that should not becomes shouldn't, could not becomes couldn't, does not becomes doesn't. As a teacher, if I ask you what will not becomes. If you say willn't, I'm actually very happy. Now we know that willn't does not exist. Will not becomes won't. But if you give me willn't based on the fact that should not becomes shouldn't, I understand that you've learned and understood the pattern and you've used it with the word will. So I'm actually happy because you've used the science that I've shown you and you've applied it to a new case. Now we know that won't is an exception, so it's my job as a teacher to simply tell you that willn't does not exist. But again, I understand that your thought process was correct based on the knowledge that I showed you and the knowledge that you had. I understand that my method does not work for everyone. With this online company that I told you about earlier, I had a German client who didn't really speak English very well, and to be honest, he didn't particularly even want to learn it. And he started having lessons with me because one of his colleagues had me as well, and she really liked me because her level was very advanced. So she recommended me to him. And after a couple of lessons, he stopped having me as his teacher because he did not like my method. My method was too detailed for him because I wanted to know why he was saying the things he was saying in English. I wanted to know the logic behind it, and he didn't know it and he did not want to learn it. He just wanted to be able to repeat a couple of things that he'd seen written in a textbook. Again, there is nothing wrong with that, but it's not the kind of language that I want my students to learn. So if that's how you want to go about learning a language, I understand, and I can tell you now that I am not the right teacher for you. It's just a different kind of approach to the whole language learning process. And this brings me to the last topic of the day. A couple of years ago, I had a bit of a YouTube spat with a teacher who commented on my grammar videos, and he accused me of making them too complicated. And my grammar games in the past were very complicated because that's the kind of grammar that I like teaching. And he accused me of confusing students because I was putting too many doubts in their heads with these very specific and tricky cases. I replied by saying that, as I always say, this is an advanced channel, so it's for advanced students. I do not recommend my channel to beginners or to people that don't particularly like understanding the logic and philosophy of English as a language, and it's perfectly fine. You don't have to like my channel. But what really shocked me and saddened me again is the fact that he told me how he teaches. He basically told me that I shouldn't share this deep knowledge about English with my students unless they directly ask for it. So basically I should teach the very standard knowledge that you find in books and in average schools, and only go deeper if a student specifically wants it. Now, I think that's wrong, but again, that is my way of seeing my job. I think it's part of my job as a teacher to give you all the knowledge that I have, as much as I can and as clearly as I can. Now, then it's up to you to either take it or leave it. If you want it, it's there. If you don't want it at all, you can just leave it completely. If you don't want it in so much detail, you can just stop wherever you feel comfortable with. And I also think it's my job as a teacher to answer all your questions before you even have them. I want to be so thorough with my explanation that I want you to leave the room without any questions, because I want to have answered them before you could even come up with them. Again, this is just my method, and I am not claiming it's the method for everyone to follow, but it's what I strive to do because I think it's the best thing to do as a teacher, and that's what I look for in other teachers, which is why I do not like many of them, because I can see that they don't really give me anything, or they don't really answer any of the natural questions that might stem from a very simple topic. They don't really go into much detail, so I don't really know even whether I should trust them or not, because I can't tell whether they know the subject well enough to be able to teach it. So if I had the time to go back to taking German lessons, which I would absolutely love, I have to say that I am not sure how hard it would be for me to find a teacher, because obviously as a teacher myself, I would want them to give me what I give as a teacher. So I am sure I would struggle a lot. The great thing about online platforms, which is where I think I would find a teacher, is that most of them have trial lessons. So I do highly recommend you use one of those free or very cheap trial lessons, so you can sort of, get the measure of the teacher, see if you think you can trust them, see if their method works for you. And there is no shame in the fact that you may not like a teacher's method. It doesn't mean that the teacher is bad. It doesn't mean that you're a bad student. It simply means that your methods don't match. And that's it for today. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to my channel down below. And do let me know in the comments if you have any questions and how you approach teaching and learning languages, whether you are a teacher or a student. This is if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, thank you very much for listening. And please do not forget to keep following me every week with a new episode.